The pale blue glow of distant stars filtered through the viewport as Krell adjusted his breathing apparatus. The ship's recycled air tasted stale in his three-chambered lungs. His iridescent scales shifted color slightly, a physiological response to anticipation that he'd never fully learned to control. "The target is Ambassador Dominic Thorne," said the encrypted hologram floating before him, the client's voice distorted beyond recognition. "Human. Male. 43 standard cycles." Krell's vertical pupils narrowed, his four-fingered hand swiping through the ambassador's credentials. Impressive for such a short-lived species. "Humans have only been in galactic politics for 2 decades, Krell noted, his voice a rasping whisper. "Why eliminate one so soon? They barely have influence." "That's precisely why," the client responded. "This particular human is persuasive. His peace initiative is gaining traction where others have failed. Certain parties find this problematic." Krell understood. War was profitable, peace was not. The galaxy's economic undercurrents were straightforward. "Payment terms?" Krell asked, practicality overriding curiosity. "Triple your standard rate. Half now, half upon verification. A substantial sum, enough to retire to the outer colonies if he wished." Not that retirement appealed to a void-born. His species typically worked until death, leisure was a concept they found disorienting. "Accepted," Krell said, closing the transmission. 3 days later, Krell's ship docked at Harmony Station, the gleaming diplomatic hub where representatives from 57 species negotiated interstellar policy. His specialized stealth technology, illegal in 17 systems, rendered him nearly invisible to standard security scans. Ambassador Thorne's quarters were predictably opulent, befitting his status. The human had just returned from a successful negotiation session, accompanied by a man in a crisp military uniform, Commander Marcus Hayes, according to Krell's intelligence. He was Thorne's security advisor and partner. Krell observed them from the environmental conduit he'd infiltrated. They were celebrating, glasses of amber liquid raised in a toast. "To the Orion Accords," Thorne said, his expression weary but satisfied. 6 species who were ready to annihilate each other 3 weeks ago just signed a resource-sharing agreement. "The Council said it couldn't be done," Hayes replied, pride evident in his voice. "But they underestimated your stubbornness." "Diplomatic skill," he corrected with a smile. "That too." They embraced briefly, and Krell felt a flicker of something akin to discomfort. Sentiment was irrelevant. The Void-born had evolved beyond such distractions, or so they claimed. When Commander Hayes left to attend a security briefing, Krell made his move. Silent as vacuum, he descended into the room. Ambassador Thorne was reviewing documents, completely unaware until Krell's shadow fell across his desk. The human looked up, startled but not afraid. "You're Void-born," he said, remarkably composed. "I've been hoping to open discussions with your people." "We prefer our privacy," Krell replied, almost respectfully. Recognition dawned in the human's eyes. "You're not here for diplomacy." "No." Thorne nodded slowly. "May I ask why?" The question surprised Krell. Most targets begged, threatened, or attacked. This calm inquiry was unusual. "Someone believes your peace efforts threaten their interests." "I see." Thorne straightened in his chair. "Will it be quick?" "Yes." "Then I only ask one thing, spare Marcus. He has nothing to do with this." Krell tilted his head. He wasn't in the contract. The killing was indeed quick and painless, a professional courtesy Krell extended to worthy opponents. As the ambassador slumped forward, Krell extracted the required DNA sample as proof. He considered waiting for the commander's return, not to kill him, but out of curiosity about how humans processed loss. A tactical error, but Krell had always been fascinated by xenopsychology. The decision was made for him when the station's alarm systems suddenly activated. Someone had discovered his entry point. Krell departed swiftly, leaving no trace except the body and a single iridescent scale that had detached during the assassination, a trivial oversight that would prove catastrophic. In his ship, accelerating away from the station, Krell filed his success report. He felt the familiar hollow satisfaction of a completed contract, unaware that he had just made the mistake of his career by underestimating humanity's capacity for vengeance, particularly that of Commander Marcus Hayes, whose grief was already hardening into something far more dangerous. Commander Marcus Hayes stood motionless in the sterile morgue of Harmony Station, staring at the body of the man he'd loved. Ambassador Dominic Thorne looked peaceful, almost as if sleeping, the assassin's method leaving no visible wounds. Only the unnatural stillness betrayed the truth. "The Council wants an official statement," Admiral Reeves said from behind him, voice carefully neutral. "Diplomatic assassination represents an act of war?" Hayes finished, not turning around. His voice was hollow, drained of emotion. Dominic would disagree. He'd call it an opportunity for dialogue. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. The forensics team found an unusual scale at the scene. Void-born. "We've already lodged a formal complaint with their conclave." Hayes finally turned, his gray eyes hardened to steel. "And what did they say?" "The usual. The Void-born conclave does not sanction assassinations. If a rogue element of our species committed this act, they acted alone." Reeves' imitation of the Voidborn's distinctive rasp was unnecessarily accurate. Hayes moved to the evidence table where the iridescent scale lay sealed in a transparent container. He picked it up, examining the way light danced across its surface in hypnotic patterns. "I'm resigning my commission," he said quietly. "Hayes, I know you're grieving, but..." "Effective immediately." He placed a data chip on the table. "My formal notice." Reeves stepped forward. "Think about what you're doing, Marcus. Your career means nothing now." Hayes pocketed the container with the scale. "The UEN military won't pursue this. They'll file complaints, make diplomatic noise, maybe impose some meaningless sanctions. Politics." He spat the word like a curse. "What exactly do you think you'll accomplish alone?" Reeves challenged. Hayes finally met his superior's eyes. "The one thing Dom never understood about me, before I was his partner, before I was your subordinate, I was Black Ops. Wetworks Division." Recognition flickered across Reeves' face. "That program was officially decommissioned." "Yes. Officially." Hayes headed for the door. "Don't try to stop me, Admiral. I should have you detained for theft of evidence," Reeves called after him. Hayes paused. "But you won't." 3 days later, Hayes' unmarked shuttle docked at Nexus Point, a sprawling space station at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. If anyone wanted to disappear, or find someone who had, Nexus was where to start. The station's lower levels were a chaotic maze of markets, pleasure houses, and shadowy businesses that operated beyond the reach of any particular species' laws. Hayes moved through them with practiced ease, his military bearing disguised beneath civilian clothing, his grief concealed behind a mask of determination. He found his contact in a dim establishment called the Void's Edge, an irony not lost on him. Talek was a Saurian information broker with scales nearly as vibrant as the one in Hayes' pocket. "Commander," Talek hissed in greeting, his slitted eyes scanning the room. "Or is it just human now?" "Just business," Hayes replied, sliding into the booth. "I need information on a Void-born assassin." Talek's inner eyelids flicked nervously. "Dangerous territory. The Void-born don't appreciate inquiries about their specialists. I don't appreciate what their specialist did to my partner." Hayes placed a credit chip on the table. "This buys your discretion and whatever you know." The Saurian's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Grief makes you reckless, human. But your credits are good. He pushed a data pad across the table. The Voidborn you seek is called Krell. Elite tier. Favors high-profile political targets. Never fails. Hayes scrolled through the sparse file. This isn't much. Because Krell is good. Very good. But I can tell you he has a pattern. After a major contract, he goes to ground in the Caldari system for approximately 30 standard days. Something about the methane-rich atmosphere aids their species' post-exertion recovery. Caldari has 17 habitable moons, Hayes noted. Talek's lipless mouth formed something like a smile. I didn't say the information was complete. But perhaps this will help. He slid another chip across the table. Tracking frequency for a very specific compound found in Voidborn breathing apparatus filters. Rare enough to be useful. Hayes pocketed it, nodding once. If this leads nowhere, then you'll be back, with more credits and more desperation. Talek shrugged. But it won't lead nowhere. As Hayes rose to leave, Talek added, I knew Thorn, by the way. Not personally, but by reputation. He believed in peaceful solutions. I'm not looking for peace, Hayes replied. The journey to the Caldari system took 8 days. Hayes spent them preparing, methodically cleaning his weapons, studying Voidborn physiology, watching old videos of Dominic. In one, the ambassador was addressing the Galactic Council, passionate about the potential for cooperation between species. Even ancient enemies can find common ground, Dominic's recorded image said, eyes bright with conviction. We just need the courage to see each other clearly. Hayes paused the recording, touching the screen. I'm seeing very clearly now, Dom, he whispered. The scanner pinged as his ship entered Caldari's orbit. 3 distinct signatures matching the Voidborn filter compound. Hayes plotted course for the closest one, on Caldari 4, a mining moon with a population of under 10,000. The settlement was predominantly Orvax miners and their families, with a scattering of other species. Hayes' human appearance drew curious glances but no hostility. He followed the scanner's readings to an isolated dwelling at the settlement's edge. It wasn't Krell, just an elderly Voidborn merchant selling black market filters. But he recognized the scale Hayes showed him. Elite caste markings, the merchant wheezed through his breathing apparatus. Ceremonial assassin. They come through sometimes, when work brings them nearby. This one, Hayes pressed. Have you seen him recently? The merchant's vertical pupils contracted. Perhaps. My memory requires lubrication. More credits changed hands. Restocked his filters yesterday. Mentioned the fighting pits on Caldari 7. The merchant tilted his head. You hunt him. This is unusual. Prey does not hunt predator. Hayes' smile was cold. Humans are predators too. We just pretend otherwise for the sake of civilization. As he left the merchant's dwelling, Hayes felt a strange sensation, like being watched. He scanned the dusty street but saw nothing suspicious. Still, the feeling persisted. Good, he thought. Let Krell know I'm coming. Let him feel what it's like to be hunted. He set course for Caldari 7, where the infamous fighting pits would draw spectators from across the system. The perfect hunting ground for both of them. In the cold darkness of space between moons, Hayes dreamed of Dom's voice, be careful not to become what you hate, love. But when he woke, all he could see was the unnatural stillness of Dominic's body, and all he could feel was the hollow space where his heart used to be. Part 3, Close Encounters. The fighting pits of Caldari 7 were renowned across 3 sectors for their brutality. Carved into the moon's surface like an ancient amphitheater, the arena was surrounded by force fields that contained the atmosphere while allowing spectators an unobstructed view of the violence below. Commander Marcus Hayes moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. He'd adopted the hunched posture and nervous mannerisms of a low-level bureaucrat, a forgettable face among the diverse species gathered to witness bloodshed. His scanner, disguised as a betting terminal, pulsed quietly against his palm, searching for the unique signature of void-borne breathing apparatus. 3 days of surveillance had yielded nothing. Hayes was beginning to think his information was flawed when the scanner suddenly vibrated. Strong signal, northwest quadrant, executive viewing boxes. Of course. Krell wouldn't mingle with common spectators. Hayes made his way toward the private boxes, a hand casually resting on the molecular blade concealed in his jacket. The weapon was illegal in 42 systems, capable of slicing through most known materials including void-borne scales. It had cost him nearly a third of his life savings on the black market. Worth every credit if it found Dominic's heart. The executive level required credentials Hayes didn't have, but security systems were designed to keep honest people honest. His military implants, reactivated with codes that should have been wiped from his discharge, made short work of the electronic locks. The scanner led him to viewing box 17. Hayes pressed his back against the wall beside the entrance, listening. 2 voices, one with the distinctive rasp of a void-born, the other the clicking speech pattern of a Noxian arms dealer. The next target requires subtlety, the Noxian was saying. The Tauran's suspect assassination after the incident with the human ambassador. The human was clean, came the rasping reply. No evidence except a scale, Hayes said, stepping into the doorway, weapon drawn. Sloppy work, Krell. The void-born assassin moved with startling speed, vertical pupils contracting to thin lines as he assessed the human intruder. The Noxian reached for a concealed weapon but froze when Hayes' blade pressed against his thorax. Leave, Hayes told the Noxian, who needed no further encouragement. Alone with the assassin, Hayes felt a strange calm descend over him. Krell was larger than he'd expected, nearly 7 feet tall, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep blue and violet. The breathing apparatus covered the lower portion of his face, giving him a perpetually masked appearance. Commander Marcus Hayes, Krell said, head tilting curiously. You were not part of the contract. Neither was finding me, Hayes replied. Yet here we are. Krell's scales rippled in what might have been amusement. Humans are persistently surprising. You tracked me across systems when most species would accept their loss. I'm not most species. Clearly. Krell made no move toward the obvious weapons at his side. Will you kill me now, human? Will that ease your grief? Hayes tightened his grip on the blade. You didn't give Dominic a choice. Why should I give you one? I gave him dignity. A clean death without suffering. Many assassins cannot claim such professionalism. The casual dismissal of Dominic's life ignited Hayes' carefully controlled rage. He lunged forward, blade slicing through the air where Krell had been standing a millisecond before. The Void-born moved with liquid grace, scales shifting to a combat pattern of mottled blacks and grays. Vengeance is a primitive response, Krell said, circling. I thought humans prided themselves on evolving beyond base instincts. Some things, Hayes growled, are worth being primitive for. The fight that followed was unlike any Hayes had experienced in his military career. Krell's physiology gave him advantages, 3-jointed limbs that bent in unexpected directions, reflexes faster than human nerve responses, scales that partially deflected Hayes' blade. But Hayes had surprise and human unpredictability on his side. He fought with a berserker's abandon, scoring several hits that leaked greenish fluid from beneath Krell's scales. The Void-born's breathing grew labored, his apparatus damaged in the struggle. A lucky strike from Krell sent Hayes crashing into the viewing window. The impact cracked his ribs and the transparent material alike. Through the spider-webbed barrier, the fighting pits continued their bloody spectacle, oblivious to the deadly combat occurring above. Your partner died for principles, Krell wheezed, approaching the downed human. Empty, meaningless principles. Peace benefits no one in the long calculation. Hayes spat blood. He believed in something. What do you believe in, assassin? Credits? Or just your own superiority? Something flickered in Krell's alien eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. It gave Hayes the opening he needed. He drove his blade upward, penetrating the assassin's side between scale plates. Krell hissed in pain, his tail lashing out to throw Hayes across the room. Both combatants stood wounded, bleeding, assessing each other with newfound respect. You fight well, Krell acknowledged, green fluid seeping between his fingers as he pressed them to his wound. Better than expected. I'm just getting started, Hayes promised, though his vision was blurring from a concussion. The station security alarms began blaring, their fight had finally triggered automated systems. Krell glanced at the exit, then back at Hayes. Another time, human. I find myself curious about your species now. Before Hayes could respond, Krell hurled himself through the cracked viewing window. The force field caught him, slowing his descent into the fighting pits below. The crowd roared, thinking it part of the show as the Voidborn disappeared into a maintenance tunnel. Hayes dragged himself to the window, watching his quarry escape. He should have felt disappointment, but instead found himself smiling through bloodied teeth. He'd wounded Krell, both physically and psychologically. The assassin would be more cautious now, more wary. But he would also be trackable. Wounded Voidborn required specialized medical treatment, and Hayes now had a sample of Krell's blood on his blade. More importantly, he'd seen something in those alien eyes. Not just a killing machine, but a being capable of doubt. It was a start. Security forces pounded on the door as Hayes activated his emergency extraction beacon. As the familiar tingle of molecular transport began to disassemble his atoms, he whispered to the absent Dominic, I'm getting closer, love. He's beginning to understand what it means to be hunted. The abandoned mining facility on Proxima II had been derelict for 30 years, its tunnels flooded with radiation that deterred most scavengers. Most, but not all. Marcus Hayes had spent 2 weeks converting the facility into an elaborate trap, using knowledge gleaned from his military days and the unique insights gained from his confrontation with Krell. His body was still healing, 3 cracked ribs, a hairline skull fracture, and numerous lacerations that the autodoc on his ship had treated with clinical efficiency if not comfort. The physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache that still consumed him when he thought of Dominic. But now there was purpose in his pain. Broadcast is ready, announced JAX, the illegal AI he'd purchased in the dark corners of Nexus Point. Encryption layered as specified. Let me hear it, Hayes commanded, adjusting the environmental controls of his makeshift command center. The message played, ostensibly a secure communication between Tauran diplomats, asset transit confirmed. Ambassador Solorn departing with prototype at 0600. Security protocols Delta 9 in effect during transfer to Proxima facility. Hayes nodded. Send it through the compromised channels. Make sure it leaves traces for Krell to find. Probability of target taking bait? JX inquired. Hi, Hayes replied, running a diagnostic on the specialized weapons he'd acquired. Krell's wound will have limited his mobility and hunting grounds. He needs a high-value, low-risk target to maintain his reputation. And if he suspects a trap? Hayes smiled grimly. That's counting on it. The bait was perfect, a Tauran ambassador supposedly carrying prototype technology, traveling with minimal security to a remote location. Valuable enough to justify Krell's fee, isolated enough to minimize risk, especially for an injured assassin. But most importantly, Proxima II's atmosphere contained trace elements that reacted poorly with void-born physiology, requiring specialized breathing apparatus. Hayes had spent a small fortune acquiring a countermeasure that would disable such equipment remotely. 3 days passed. Hayes maintained his vigil, sleeping in short bursts, always alert. JX monitored all approach vectors, the AI's distributed sensors providing a web of surveillance impossible for a single human. Contact, JX announced on the 4th day. Small craft approaching on stealth trajectory. Matching known profiles of void-borne vessels. Hayes felt a cold clarity descend over him. Track but don't interfere. Let him think he's undetected. He moved to his prepared position in the facility's old processing center, surrounded by equipment that had been carefully modified. Not weapons, Krell would be expecting those, but atmospheric processors that could be activated remotely. The waiting was excruciating. Hayes found himself touching the small hollow projector that contained his last image of Dominic. He resisted the urge to activate it. Focus was essential now. Target has breached outer perimeter, JAX reported through Hayes' earpiece. Moving through southern access tunnel. Breathing apparatus detected. Hayes activated the first sequence. Throughout the facility, atmospheric composition began subtly shifting, nothing dramatic enough to trigger Krell's equipment warnings, but building toward a critical threshold. The facility's old systems groaned to life, creating a cacophony of industrial sounds that masked Hayes' movements as he repositioned. Through the surveillance feed, he watched Krell advancing cautiously through the tunnels, moving with the predatory grace that had nearly killed Hayes in their last encounter. The Voidborn paused at a junction, head tilting as he analyzed his surroundings. His wound seemed to have healed, though Hayes noted he favored his left side slightly. More importantly, his breathing apparatus had been upgraded, a more robust model that would be harder to compromise. Hayes hadn't expected anything less. He's searching for life signs, JAX noted. Deploying countermeasures. Throughout the facility, small devices activated, projecting false biosignatures that would register as a Tauran security detail. Hayes had studied Krell's methodology thoroughly. The assassin preferred to eliminate guards systematically before approaching his primary target. The trap was working. Krell diverted toward the nearest false signature, his movements becoming more predatory. Hayes activated the second sequence, and atmospheric processors increased their output. The air in the facility was now reaching the precise composition needed to interact with Krell's breathing apparatus. Target has eliminated 3 decoys, JAX reported. Apparatus filtration showing initial signs of strain. Hayes moved silently through a maintenance crawlspace, emerging behind Krell's position. The Voidborn was examining one of the destroyed decoys, his posture betraying confusion at the lack of a body. Clever, Krell murmured, voice carrying in the cavernous space. Very clever, Commander Hayes. Hayes remained silent, activating the final sequence. Throughout the facility, the atmosphere reached critical composition. Krell's breathing apparatus sputtered, emitting an alarm only the Voidborn could hear. I underestimated you, Krell called out, turning slowly in a defensive posture. Few beings have managed that. You underestimated humanity, Hayes replied, his voice echoing from carefully placed speakers throughout the facility, making his location impossible to pinpoint. Krell's scales flashed in warning patterns, shifting rapidly between colors as he attempted to compensate for his failing apparatus. Is this your vengeance, human? Suffocation? I granted your partner a dignified death. This isn't about dignity, Hayes said, moving closer while remaining concealed. It's about justice. Justice? Krell laughed, a harsh sound through his laboring equipment. There is no justice in the void between stars, only contracts and consequences. Then consider this a consequence. The apparatus failed completely with a pneumatic hiss. Krell dropped to one knee, scales turning a sickly gray as he struggled to process the toxic atmosphere. When Hayes finally stepped into view, molecular blade in hand, the assassin looked up with those vertical pupils dilated in distress. You could have killed me from hiding, Krell observed, voice strained. Yet you show yourself. Why? Because I want you to see me, Hayes answered. I want you to understand who defeated you. Krell nodded slightly. The partner. The one left behind. I see the symmetry now. Hayes activated a containment field that enclosed Krell in a shimmering bubble. The atmosphere inside gradually normalized, allowing the Voidborn to breathe again, though the field would prevent any movement. You spared me, Krell noted, surprise evident in his alien features. For now, Hayes replied. First, you're going to tell me who contracted the hit on Ambassador Thorn. Krell's pupils narrowed. You know I cannot. Professional ethics. Hayes laughed bitterly. An assassin with ethics. That's convenient. Even killers have codes, Commander. Without them, we are merely animals. Hayes approached the containment field, studying his captive. Tell me why. Why Dominic? He was working for peace, for cooperation between species. Precisely, Krell replied. Some entities profit from division. Your partner's initiatives threatened powerful interests. Give me names. Krell's scales rippled in what might have been resignation. I cannot. But perhaps I can offer something else. Information about the larger game being played. Hayes leaned closer. I'm listening. But first, Krell said, a question of my own. When you have your answers, what then? Will you execute me? Return me to human authorities? Your options are limited. It was a question Hayes had avoided asking himself during the long hunt. What was the endgame? What would Dominic want? First the information, Hayes decided. Then we'll discuss your fate. As Krell began to speak, Hayes felt the hollow space inside him shift slightly. Not healing, nothing so simple. But changing, evolving into something more complex than the pure vengeance that had driven him across the stars. The holding cell aboard Hayes' ship was not designed for long-term captivity, but it had sufficed for the 3-day journey back to neutral space. Krell sat in contemplative silence, his iridescent scales muted in the dim lighting. The specialized atmospheric regulators hummed quietly, maintaining conditions that allowed the Voidborn to breathe without his apparatus. Hayes studied the assassin through the security feed, conflicting emotions warring within him. Krell's revelations had changed everything, painting a picture far more complex than a simple assassination. The information checks out, JAX confirmed, the AI's voice emotionless as it displayed evidence on the main console. Ambassador Thorn's peace initiative would have disrupted the hegemony's control of trade routes through the Orion Spur. And the hegemony leadership authorized the hit, Hayes murmured, scrolling through the data. Not some rogue faction or corporate interest. Correct. Specifically, High Arbiter Vex authorized the contract. Transmission logs confirm it. Hayes leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. 6 weeks of obsessive pursuit had left him hollow, running on rage and determination. Now, with the truth before him, he felt strangely empty. What will you do with me? Krell asked when Hayes finally entered the holding cell. The Voidborn seemed resigned, almost peaceful in his captivity. I haven't decided. Hayes settled into a chair opposite the assassin, separated by an energy barrier. Turning you over to human authorities would mean execution. As would killing me yourself, Krell observed. Though one offers legal absolution, the other personal satisfaction. A difficult choice. Hayes studied the alien before him. Why did you tell me the truth? Your professional ethics seemed flexible enough when it served you. Krell's scales shifted in patterns Hayes had learned to recognize as thoughtfulness. Your pursuit was unprecedented in my experience. When you spared my life in the mining facility, it challenged my understanding of your species. You mean it surprised you that I didn't kill you on the spot? Precisely. Krell tilted his head. I have eliminated 73 targets across 17 species. You are the first whose partner has managed to capture me. Most seek vengeance through mindless violence. You demonstrated something else. Don't mistake planning for mercy, Hayes warned. I mistake nothing, Krell replied. But I recognize evolution when I witness it. Your grief transformed into purpose, purpose into understanding. You sought not merely to end my existence but to comprehend why your partner's life was taken. Hayes felt a flash of anger. Don't psychoanalyze me, assassin. You don't know anything about what I feel. Perhaps not, Krell acknowledged. Void-born emotional structures differ significantly from humans. But I understand loss, Commander Hayes. My species lives centuries. We watch companions die. We continue. That's existence, not living, Hayes said bitterly. A distinction your partner understood well. Krell's vertical pupils fixed on Hayes. Ambassador Thorne's final words were a message for you. Hayes froze. What? He said, tell Marcus to continue the work, not the fight. The word struck Hayes like a physical blow. They sounded exactly like something Dominic would say. You're lying. I have no reason to lie now, Krell responded. It changes nothing about my fate. Hayes stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cell. If you're manipulating me. To what end? I am your prisoner. My life is in your hands. Krell's scales rippled in what Hayes had come to recognize as sincerity. I simply offer what truth I possess. Hayes stopped pacing, looking at the assassin with new awareness. You respected him. I respect all my targets, Krell corrected. But your partner was unusual. Even knowing his death was imminent, he thought of others. Of you. The ship's proximity alert broke the moment. They had arrived at the coordinates Hayes had programmed, neutral space, far from both human and hegemony territories. We've arrived, Hayes said, more to himself than to Krell. At my execution site, the Voidborn inquired, voice calm. Hayes studied the assassin who had taken everything from him. The being who had set him on this path of vengeance across the stars. Who now sat before him, not with defiance or pleading, but with a strange dignity. No, Hayes decided. At a beginning. He deactivated the energy barrier between them. You're releasing me? Krell asked, genuinely surprised. With conditions. Hayes placed a data chip on the table between them. This contains everything we know about High Arbiter Vex and the hegemony's involvement in Dominic's assassination. Political leverage. Krell's scales flashed in understanding. You wish me to use this against my former employers. I wish you to ensure that Dominic's death wasn't meaningless, Hayes corrected. The peace initiative he worked for would benefit billions across multiple species, including void-born colonies on the rim. You could release this information yourself. A human accusation would be dismissed as grief-driven propaganda. A void-born assassin with inside knowledge turning against the hegemony, that carries weight. Krell considered this, scales shifting through patterns of calculation. It would make me a target for the rest of my life. Welcome to my world, Hayes replied without sympathy. After a long moment, Krell reached for the chip. Your partner believed species could evolve beyond ancient enmities. Perhaps he was not entirely incorrect. This doesn't make us allies, Hayes warned. If I ever discover you've returned to assassination, you would hunt me again, Krell finished. I understand. But know this, Commander Hayes, your hunt has changed us both. I will not forget the lesson. As Hayes escorted the assassin to the airlock where a small shuttle awaited, a strange peace settled over him. Not forgiveness, never that, but something adjacent to understanding. Dominic would be proud of your choice, Krell said as a parting observation. Hayes shook his head. Dominic would have invited you to a peace conference and offered you a role as security consultant. For the first time, Hayes heard what might have been void-born laughter, a rhythmic vibration that rippled through Krell's scales. Perhaps in another life, Commander. Perhaps. As the shuttle departed, Hayes returned to the bridge. JX awaited instructions. Set course for Earth, Hayes decided. There's a peace initiative that needs continuation. He touched the small holoprojector containing Dominic's image, activating it for the first time since beginning his hunt. His partner's smile beamed up at him, full of the optimism and vision that had made him both a target and a beacon. Continue the work, not the fight, Hayes murmured. I hear you, love. I hear you. The stars stretched into lines as the ship accelerated to lightspeed, carrying Hayes home, not to the revenge he had sought, but to the purpose he had found in its place. In the void between stars, where Krell had claimed only contracts and consequences existed, Hayes had discovered something else, the possibility of change. It wasn't the ending he had imagined when he began his hunt for the alien assassin who had left him for dead in his grief. But perhaps, he reflected as Earth grew larger in his view screen, it was the beginning Dominic would have chosen.